Welcome to True Crime Audio Pod, where we unravel the threads of the most disturbing true crime stories. Today's story unfolds with a chilling discovery in Chicago, where the lifeless body of a young Danish woman, Birgitte Andersen, was found in her apartment. The story, marked by its twists and turns, leaves us contemplating the thin line between love and obsession, and the irreversible consequences of crossing that line. Police responded to a call on a sweltering August night about an altercation involving a physical fight. The procedure followed was to dispatch a cruiser to the reported address with officers expected to defuse the situation, a routine anticipated to bring the dispute to a halt. On the date in question, August 10, 1987, officers from a suburban Chicago police department arrived at a small residence in Evanston, Illinois. Their expectation was to mediate a family argument that had escalated beyond control, dedicating no more than 30 minutes to the task. The officers were greeted by a woman in her early 40s, the informant of the fracas. As they entered the home, she relayed fragmented details of the incident. She explained that one family member was conducting his affairs peacefully when he was abruptly confronted and attacked by another resident, leading to a violent exchange. It was at this juncture that she decided to call the authorities. When questioned about the regularity of such confrontations, the woman clarified that altercations of this nature were not commonplace. She added that the two family members typically enjoyed a harmonious relationship, to the extent of considering each other best friends, a stark contrast to the night's events. There was no semblance of friendship between the two young men who faced the police officers in the living room, their expressions sullen, occasionally exchanging hostile looks. One of them, bearing the aftermath of their conflict with bloodied clothing, was a lanky man exceeding 6 feet in height, introducing himself as Mark Sublette. Struggling to temper his anger, Sublette acknowledged his abrupt entry into the home in search of his kin, Michael Daniels. Demanding answers to pressing questions and dissatisfied with the responses, Sublette had resorted to physical violence and, in a heated moment, swung an electric fan from a nearby table, cutting his hand on its metal edge, the blood staining his attire. Daniels, who shared Sublette's tall and lean build, appeared physically unmarked by the altercation. Inquiring into the root of the conflict, the officers were met with Sublette's revelation regarding a personal tragedy. He recounted an earlier visit to his partner's apartment, located just beyond the Chicago city limits, where he discovered her lifeless body upon his arrival. "You found her dead?" the officer inquired. "She was dead," Sublette confirmed. He declared his willingness to take the officers to the location. The cops, clearly surprised, escorted the tall man outside, meanwhile directing his relative to stay put until they could confirm the veracity of the unusual story. As they traveled to the address Sublette provided, a call was dispatched to the Chicago police, the authorities responsible for the area where the alleged crime scene was located. By the time Sublette and the Evanston officers arrived at the apartment building on West Birchwood Avenue, 2 Chicago policemen were already there to greet them. Upon being informed of a body in an apartment on the 2nd floor, the Chicago officers, who had not received any reports of such an incident, consented to investigate. Sublette led the quartet of detectives to the apartment and paused at the door. The officers watched him extract a key from his pocket and unlock the top lock, then proceed to use a different key for the deadbolt lock below. They entered the apartment from the neglected hallway. The apartment was filled with a dim early afternoon light that sneaked through the modest blinds covering the windows, casting a glow on the white walls, starkly devoid of decoration or pictures. The furnishings were minimal, a square table adorned with a portable radio and, in one corner, concrete blocks repurposed as a TV stand. A mattress rested directly on a box spring against a wall. The officers observed the lifeless bare legs of a woman hanging over the bed's edge, her body concealed by a crumpled sheet and a stained pillow marked with red. The slender Sublette's account was no fabrication. One officer swiftly descended to the patrol car to summon medical assistance. However, before the arrival of the paramedics, the officers in the apartment ascertained the woman's death. It's not uncommon for culprits to direct police to a crime scene, hoping their apparent cooperation will misdirect the investigation. Some of the most heinous criminals have feigned assistance, diligently combing through the crime scene alongside the police. With this perspective, the Chicago officers apprehended Mark Sublette on the spot. Sublette voiced his objections, yet he could not dismiss the incriminating evidence: the blood on his attire, his close connection to the deceased, and his known propensity for violence. As the investigation intensified and additional law enforcement arrived, including detectives Carrie Orr and Jim Spencer from the Belmont Area Violent Crimes Unit, a young blonde woman in her 20s approached the apartment. She inquired about the unfolding events, identifying herself as a resident of another floor who had grown concerned upon noticing the commotion at her friend's residence. An officer delivered the grim news to the woman and then queried if she was willing to identify the deceased. Moments later, the body was confirmed to be that of 18-year-old Birgitte Andersen from Denmark. The blonde woman, a fellow Dane, recognized Birgitte, stating they had been acquainted for a few months. The officers expanded their inquiry to other residents familiar with Birgitte. One neighbor recounted, "She talked to people on buses and trains, and when they would follow her home, she'd tell me she just thought they were going the same way. She was like a child, a sweet and very naive child. She wasn't wise to big city ways." Another neighbor expressed that they had cautioned Birgitte to be more vigilant, but she couldn't understand. "She told me she came from a place where her family never even locked her doors, so Chicago was like another planet to her." In adherence to standard procedures regarding the death of a foreign national, the officers contacted the Danish embassy in the United States. The embassy officials recognized Birgitte Andersen's name and provided information that helped construct an initial profile of the young woman found slain. Birgitte had arrived in Chicago from Saltum, a town in northern Denmark, 6 months before her death. Initially arriving on a transit visa, which indicated a short visit to the U.S., Birgitte had, according to consular officers, sought to extend her stay. Recently, she had inquired about a student visa to enroll at Northwestern University in Chicago. A vice consul at the Danish consulate in Chicago remarked she planned to attend college classes this fall. She wanted to study the travel business. She was very smart. She made a very positive impression. Upon inquiry regarding Birgitte's means of sustenance over the past 4 months, the vice consul revealed that she had been employed as a nanny for a local family, a job she secured without formal documentation. It was a well-known fact that numerous European women travel to the U.S. alone, often working informally for American families as nannies or part-time housekeepers, sometimes in return for accommodation and food. This arrangement served as a feasible option for young Europeans with limited funds who wished to experience the world before returning home with enriching tales. However, the narrative for Birgitte Andersen would take a somber turn. She would be returning to Denmark not with stories of adventure, but within the confines of a casket, her final chapter to be conveyed to her family by the Danish consular officials. The crime scene's forensic investigation uncovered evidence that Birgitte Andersen had been sexually assaulted prior to her demise. The assault's severity was underscored by the presence of blood on the lower portion of her body. Despite the inflicted brutality, an ankle bracelet of small links persisted around her right leg, undisturbed. This bracelet, alongside a wristwatch, were the sole adornments on her otherwise bare figure. Further forensic analysis concluded that asphyxiation was the cause of Birgitte's death, although the exact method used by the perpetrator remained uncertain. A metal chain was found around her neck, potentially serving as the instrument of murder. Adding to the grim details, a man's shirt had been forcibly stuffed into Birgitte's throat. Whether it was to silence her screams or as a means to end her life was indeterminate pending additional examinations. The chilling possibility that the murderer had removed his own shirt to commit the crime crossed the minds of the investigators. Identifying the individual who matched the shirt's size would be pivotal, particularly if that individual proved to be Mark Sublette, as it would substantiate the suspicions surrounding him. Upon uncovering Birgitte's body, which had been veiled by a floral sheet, the officers discovered further evidence and indicators of the violence that had transpired in her room. They found fragments of a wooden handle that appeared to have been recently broken, its jagged edges freshly splintered and fitting together neatly, though the end piece designed to attach to a metal tool was nowhere to be found. The extreme violence that shattered the wooden handle possibly accounted for the deep, bloody lacerations on the young blonde's head. The blood from these wounds had soaked the pillow that had been placed over her face and left additional bloodstains on the wall behind the bed. The officers' inspection of the crime scene led them to perceive the offense as one of prolonged, vicious violence. The nature of the assault suggested that rape was the likely primary motive. The few valuables present in Birgitte's apartment, including the portable radio, a modest television, and her wristwatch, remained undisturbed. The official autopsy confirmed the cause of death to be the result of blunt force trauma to the head combined with asphyxiation. Rigor mortis indicated that the murder had taken place earlier in the day, possibly after midnight. Further conversation with the victim's friend from Denmark disclosed that Birgitte had been alive until at least 1:30 a.m. She had phoned her friend at that time, expressing her desire to visit her upstairs. During their brief phone call, Birgitte mentioned the presence of two men, specifically naming Mark Sublette and Michael Daniels. She indicated a desire to speak with one of them before joining her friend upstairs. When Birgitte failed to appear later on, her friend surmised that the conversation may have led to a sexual encounter, a supposition deemed logical given Birgitte's known attraction to men. The police were able to obtain the address of Birgitte's most recent employers, a young couple in Evanston, through her Danish friend who occasionally worked as a nanny. The couple from Evanston confirmed Birgitte's employment the prior evening, noting that due to the lateness of the hour upon their return, the husband had driven Birgitte back to her apartment. He recalled leaving her before 11 o'clock, stating that Birgitte appeared to be in her usual state, without any indication of distress or impending danger. What transpired in Birgitte's apartment between 11 o'clock and 2 a.m. that led to such a brutal and violent end? At the 24th District Headquarters in Chicago, detectives turned to Mark Sublette seeking explanations. His situation had escalated beyond suspicion to incrimination. During a search at the headquarters, Sublette surrendered close to $200 in cash, for which he could not account. Notably, no money was discovered in Birgitte Andersen's apartment. Despite the intense scrutiny in the interrogation room, Sublette maintained his composure. He claimed innocence in Birgitte's murder, asserting that he had been with another girlfriend that night. According to Sublette, they had rented a room at a hotel, providing the detectives with both the hotel's name and address. Under duress, he revealed the girlfriend's identity, Michelle Ordman. Michelle came from an affluent family that would be dismayed to learn of her association with Sublette, who was not only of a different social standing but also a married man. Michelle Ordman corroborated Sublette's alibi without hesitation. She confirmed that they had indeed spent the night together in a hotel room, fully aware of his marital status and his occasional liaisons with another girlfriend. She recounted that they had visited Birgitte's apartment earlier with Michael Daniels, Sublette's relative. While Sublette and Daniels went upstairs, she remained in the car. Shortly after, Sublette came back to the car alone, and they proceeded to the hotel. Michelle Ordman's account, which appeared to provide an alibi for Sublette, was considered credible by the investigators. They deduced her indifferent attitude towards Sublette's promiscuity suggested she did not have a deep-seated reason to fabricate a story for him. Her admission that Sublet could be violent, having experienced his wrath firsthand, seemed to be a candid acknowledgement rather than a statement made out of fear of retribution. The detectives found themselves at a crossroads. Corroborated by independent testimonies, Birgitte was last seen alive around 1 a.m. in the presence of Sublet and Daniels. With Sublet proclaiming his innocence, the scrutiny shifted towards Michael Daniels. Daniels killed her, Sublet asserted nonchalantly, as if it were a foregone conclusion. Sublet admitted to not having witnessed the murder but insisted that Daniels was the only viable suspect. He recounted the night's timeline. He had collected his other girlfriend with the intention of visiting the beach for beers. En route, they encountered his relative, the 18-year-old Michael Daniels, who was easily persuaded to join them, given his predilection for alcohol. The trio's revelry extended past 11 o'clock on the beach, until Sublet, feeling the urge for intimacy, suggested they retire to a hotel with his girlfriend, who consented. On their way to drop Daniels off in Evanston, he began to boast about a blonde beauty he'd encountered on the beach days earlier, claiming he had already been intimate with her multiple times. The thought of rekindling their encounter made Daniels eager to see her again. Daniels requested to be dropped at a particular address on West Birchwood Street, claiming it to be the residence of the blonde woman. Sublet responded with astonishment, revealing that he too was involved with a blonde who lived on the same street. This peculiar twist sparked both men's interest and vanity. Arriving at the address, Sublet was taken aback to discover that Daniels' newfound acquaintance resided at the same location as his own romantic interest. Leaving Sublet's girlfriend asleep in the car, the two men exited the vehicle. Sublet did not need to buzz the intercom. He produced a key and unlocked the door, granting both himself and Daniels access to the building. Daniels looked on with envy, puzzled as to why Sublet had a key while he himself had to rely on the buzzer for entry. The atmosphere grew tense between the two men as they ascended to the second floor, taking the same turn at the landing and walking side by side to a door both recognized well. Sublet, without hesitation, used his keys to unlock the door and allow both himself and Daniels entry. Upon their entrance, the apartment's darkness was abruptly displaced by the harsh illumination from the overhead light, thoughtlessly switched on without consideration for the girl sleeping on the mattress bed. The intrusive light startled Birgitte awake, marking the onset of several shocking revelations she would confront in the final hours of her life. The second jolt for Birgitte was the recognition of the two figures before her. The realization that the two men she had been seeing were not only acquaintances but friends was something she could never have envisaged, even in her most unsettling dreams. The shock was mutual. Birgitte was astounded to learn of her boyfriend's connection, while the men were taken aback to discover they had been unwittingly involved with the same woman. Sublet recounted that Birgitte appeared to handle the unexpected situation with equanimity, perhaps attributed to the reputed Scandinavian liberality towards sexual relationships. She seemed unfazed by the concurrent romantic engagements with Sublet and Daniels, treating it as a non-issue. However, Sublet noted a starkly different reaction from Daniels. He became vulgar, agitatedly pacing and issuing threats towards Birgitte. Despite Daniels' hostility, Birgitte attempted to defuse the tension. Sublet lingered for a short while before recollecting the presence of his other girlfriend in the car outside. Sublet last observed Birgitte alive as he exited and secured her apartment door, leaving her in an effort to soothe a riled Daniels around 1 a.m. Sublet and his other girlfriend proceeded to the hotel as intended, where they stayed overnight. The following day, en route to his girlfriend's place, Sublet suggested a detour to Birgitte's apartment for a quick refresh, reasoning that Birgitte would be at work and none the wiser of their intrusion. Upon entering Birgitte's apartment with his keys, Sublet was confronted with the sight of her body, lifeless on the bed. He quickly shielded his girlfriend from the scene and secured the door again. Sublet recounted that after discovering Birgitte's body, he and his girlfriend immediately left for Daniels' residence. Without hesitation, Sublette entered Daniel's home and went directly to his bedroom, where he found him asleep. Sublette implied that had the authorities not been alerted, the situation might have escalated to further violence, potentially involving Daniels, Sublette, or both. During an interrogation led by Detective Carrie Orr, Daniels presented his version of events. He concurred with Sublette's account up to a point. Both had been angered upon learning of Birgitte's intimate relationships with each of them. After Sublette departed the apartment, Daniels stayed behind to converse with Birgitte. According to Daniels, their discussion was fruitless, culminating in Birgitte asking him to leave, which he claimed to have done without incident. Daniels asserted that he first became aware of Birgitte's murder when Sublette visited him the next morning. He adamantly suggested that Sublette was the perpetrator, accusing him of committing the murder and then attempting to deflect suspicion onto Daniels. The investigators were skeptical of the accusations exchanged between the two men. Although both Sublette and Daniels had motives for murder, as well as the opportunity and a history of violent behavior, it was unclear who was responsible for the crime. The question of who actually committed the murder remained unresolved. Leveraging the stronger alibi provided by Sublette's second girlfriend, who had spent the night with him, detectives intensified their interrogation of Daniels. Persistence eventually paid off, revealing inconsistencies in his narrative. Following two initial interrogations where Daniels maintained his innocence, Detective Orr proposed a direct conversation between Sublette and Daniels around 8:15 p.m. Daniels consented. Once in the same room, Sublette implored Daniels to disclose the truth. It was at this juncture that Daniels confessed to assaulting Birgitte. After removing Sublette from the room, Detective Orr resumed his interrogation, and Daniels' story unfolded further. He claimed to have developed strong feelings for Birgitte after meeting her on the beach. Learning of her relations with Sublette provoked him into a rage. He admitted to first slapping and then striking Birgitte twice. The first punch caused her to hit her head on the bedside table, and he hit her again afterward. Daniels recounted that during the assault, he thought he heard someone approaching, which prompted him to flee the apartment. Once he believed the coast was clear, he returned to find Birgitte seated on the bed, bleeding profusely and struggling to speak. In a state of panic, Birgitte attempted to defend herself, managing to scratch Daniels' hand. Ignoring her distress, Daniels gagged her with a rag. He confessed to then sexually assaulting her. He removed her underpants and masturbated on her, climaxing on her vagina. He then returned home. Michael Daniels was charged with murder and detained at Cook County Jail without the possibility of bail. It took over 2 years for his case to reach trial, which occurred in October 1989 before Judge Robert Boherick. Daniels' defense attorney contested the manner in which Daniels' confession had been secured by the police. The attorney suggested that there was more to the confession than what was revealed, and he speculated about Sublette's deeper involvement in the crime. He posited that Sublette was a central figure in the events that transpired. Sublette, meanwhile, had compounded suspicions against himself by incurring further legal troubles. As someone already convicted of fraud via bad checks, he was subsequently arrested for assault and battery, leading to a prison sentence. This situation led to the prosecution's awkward position of summoning their principal witness from his jail cell during Daniels' murder trial. Any questions about the credibility of Sublette's testimony as an incarcerated individual were overshadowed by the evidence presented by Larry Presley, an FBI scientist. Presley testified regarding DNA tests conducted on samples taken from the victim, Daniels, and Sublette, which analyzed the genetic markers in their DNA profiles. DNA profiling, being unique to each individual except in the case of identical twins, allowed for a definitive identification of the assailant through a match between the DNA in the semen found on Birgitte's body and the DNA of the suspect. In In court, Larry Presley stated that the DNA from the semen on Birgitte did not match Sublet's DNA. However, it did match Daniel's DNA, conclusively linking him to the crime. The introduction of DNA evidence in this case marked a watershed moment in Illinois' legal history, being the first instance where such scientific testimony determined the outcome of a criminal trial. This success was a significant victory for the prosecutor, David Sabatini, who had the challenging task of convincing the court of the reliability of this relatively new form of evidence. Judge Robert Boherick, faced with a decision devoid of legal precedent in the state, accepted the DNA evidence as admissible. He was likely influenced by the compelling statistical argument presented by FBI scientist Larry Presley, which underscored the astronomical improbability of two unrelated individuals sharing the same DNA profile. The jury found this scientific evidence persuasive, and after a mere 5 hours of deliberation, they delivered a guilty verdict on the counts of murder and aggravated criminal sexual assault. During the subsequent death penalty hearing on November 2, 1989, the jury did not reach a unanimous decision to impose the death penalty on Daniels. Ultimately, on December 12, 1989, Daniels received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder, along with a concurrent 30-year sentence for the sexual assault. This verdict meant that Daniels would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no opportunity for release. On December 13, 1989, Michael Daniels initiated an appeal process. His appeal was grounded on the assertion of ineffective legal representation and a violation of due process. Daniels contended that the DNA evidence presented by the state's expert was not only incorrect but also misleading. Furthermore, he alleged that Sublet had committed perjury during the trial. After several years, the court delivered its decision on June 13, 1995. The ruling differentiated between the issues raised by Daniels. Regarding the DNA evidence and the claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, the court sustained the motion to dismiss, suggesting that these grounds for appeal were not accepted. However, the court was open to exploring the claims related to perjury and the possibility of new evidence. Hence, it granted an evidentiary hearing on these specific matters. This decision allowed for a re-examination of parts of the case, notably the aspects concerning the credibility of the testimony given and the potential for new evidence that might have surfaced post-trial. In 1997, the court upheld Michael Daniels' conviction and the life sentence for the murder and aggravated criminal sexual assault of Birgitte Andersen. The court found no merit in Daniels' claim of ineffective assistance from his counsel, hence affirming the trial court's dismissal of this claim without necessitating an evidentiary hearing. The court also concluded that Daniels did not qualify for a new trial based on the arguments presented in his post-conviction and post-judgment petitions. The issues regarding the DNA evidence were determined to be insufficient in alleging constitutional violations, leading to a dismissal without an evidentiary hearing. Furthermore, the court found that the trial court's decision to deny relief based on claims of perjury, which was determined after a full hearing, was justified. The ruling indicated that the trial court's conclusion was not against the manifest weight of the evidence, meaning that the evidence did not heavily favor Daniels' claim to the point of suggesting a serious error by the trial court. Therefore, the appellate court's decision reinforced the original verdict and sentencing, confirming Daniels' imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole. Thank you for joining us through the twists and turns of this harrowing story. Until next time, keep seeking answers in the shadows, and remember, behind every headline lies a lesson waiting to be learned. Don't forget to leave a short comment and hit the like button.